I'm Cynthia Pitonyak with VCU ACE. This webcast is the second of a two-part discussion of inclusion. In this webcast, we will specifically focus on a couple of planning ideas that you can use to make inclusion effective and meaningful for a wider range of students. But first, let's take just a moment to review a couple of key ideas from part one. In part one, we discussed that the term inclusion is not mentioned in IDEA or in No Child Left Behind or the Every Student Succeeds Act for that matter or anywhere. Inclusion is not in the law. VAAP, a free and appropriate public education, and LRE, the least restrictive environment, and IEP, individual education program, are in the law. It is because of VAAP and LRE that inclusion happens, and the IEP spells out how it happens, but the term inclusion itself is not mentioned. So, as we discussed in the first webcast, that means that it's possible for us to expand the way we define inclusion. We can move beyond just defining it as 80% of the day in a general ed classroom to authentic membership that contains all of the elements that produce the great results that we saw in the research in the first webcast. We can move from just focusing on whether or not students should be in a general ed classroom to focusing on how to help our students belong there. Of course, physical placement is the first step. The student must be physically present. But rather than looking just at minutes in the day, if a student is truly included in a general ed class, she must have access to all of the environments and the daily routines that students in this class use every day. She must have access to the same kinds of social interactions that other students have, and the supports required to give her the same opportunities to develop relationships with her classmates. She must have the specialized instruction she needs to meaningfully participate and make progress in the general curriculum as well as her IEP goals. When we think this way, we can make inclusion available to more students, not just to those who can participate in the regular SOL-driven academic program without much modification. In the first webcast, we learned to use a program matrix, a simple process for finding opportunities within the general ed classroom for instruction on IEP goals. We can also use a program matrix to identify what type of planning will be required for this instruction. In this webcast, let's start by thinking a little about functional skills, the skills we use to carry out the basic activities of daily life. Most of us pick these up incidentally from our parents or on our own, and we know that students with more significant disabilities require explicit instruction in these skills. Now, especially with older students, we often can provide functional skills instruction out in the community, which is great. Many times, though, we use a separate special ed classroom to simulate situations requiring the use of functional skills, and we provide our instruction there. In fact, the need for functional skills instruction is often seen as a reason why students need to be removed from a general ed classroom, because the opportunity for functional skills instruction and practice is seen as not being available there. But when you think about it, why do we focus on teaching functional skills anyway? Because we want our students to be as ready as possible when they leave us, to move toward a positive future, a self-determined future. What do we mean by that? A self-determined future means that when our students leave us, they can continue their education or join the workforce. They can pursue a meaningful life of their own choosing. They can contribute to the larger community. That's a self-determined future. That's what we all want for all kids, right? It's what we want for ourselves. Do you know anyone for whom this type of future would not be your hope? We want our students to be empowered as much as they possibly can to join the world around them, to be part of their community, wherever that is. That's why we care about teaching functional skills in the first place. So we need to make sure that the functional skills we teach help our students move in the world and connect to the world. And the regular school and the general ed classroom are very much the world for children. Now, some of you may already use a functional skills curriculum or assessment, and there are some good ones out there that are specifically designed to address meaningful functional skills instruction in inclusive school environments. The Coach and the Factor are two good examples, and there may be others out there that I don't know about. But if you use either one of these, you've got it covered when it comes to planning functional skills that can be taught in inclusive settings. But if you don't use a set curriculum or assessment, or the one you use doesn't lend itself to inclusive instruction, all is not lost. It's not rocket science. An IEP committee who knows a student really well can easily identify meaningful functional goals that directly relate to that self-determined future that we all want for our kids and for ourselves. There are really just a couple of steps in the process. First, we want to make sure that we're focusing on the right skills. Tom Nerney of the Center for Self-Determination in Ann Arbor, Michigan, is one of the great leaders in helping all kinds of people realize that dream of a self-determined future. And he says that there are 3 elements that are absolutely necessary for that dream to become a reality. We need to be self-directed, to negotiate the environment, to make choices, to meet our own needs and wants to some extent. We need to develop and maintain relationships with other people, and we need to practice citizenship, to be accountable to ourselves and others, to see ourselves as belonging to a group, to make a contribution somehow to the larger community. These are the aspects of a self-determined future, and our students need to learn functional skills for these 3 reasons. In fact, I challenge you to think of any functional skill that a student needs to learn that doesn't relate to one of these elements. This is the forest. The specific skills we teach are the trees. So skills that support self-direction, relationships, and citizenship, both being part of a group and making a contribution, are the skills we need to be teaching. And there's a simple little test we can use to be sure that the functional goals we set for our students are going to be meaningful for them. The first test is, what will the student actually do with this skill? If he learns it, what will he be doing with it? We want to get really specific here. The second test is, does this skill lead to connection with the community somehow? If we can't see a direct connection, that's a red flag when it comes to making sure that we are teaching our students the skills that will have meaning to them. And the third test is, if this student is not going to learn to be completely independent with this skill, if he's going to always require support to do it, is it structured to still allow him to be self-directed for parts of it by using the principle of assisted competence? The principle of assisted competence helps us get beyond ideas of either total independence or helplessness. It's a middle ground. It's the idea that the student and their supporter would work as a team in performing the skill, with each one having parts to play, rather than the supporter either prompting the student through the whole thing or just doing it for him. Assisted competence allows a student with extensive support needs to still have self-direction in the parts of the skill that they are responsible for performing. And we're going to look at a bunch of examples of this. Now, for those of you who like some kind of guideline to follow, this little form might help you or your IEP team to think this through together, using the elements of a self-determined future to select your functional goals, and then using the 3-part test to be sure they're going to be meaningful for your student. So let's start by thinking about skills that lead to self-direction. The question for the IEP team to ask themselves here is, what do we hope to see this student doing independently by this time next year? And for the moment, I would like to kind of zero in on academics here, especially the idea of functional academics. These are goals that we often set for our students to learn with the idea that they will be able to do them without help eventually. An example of this would be something like reading functional sight words. A common goal, many students have this on their IEP, something like read 25 functional sight words. We want the student to do it independently with no help, so it's definitely a self-direction goal, no question there. But let's look at how this little three-part test might help us adjust this goal to make it more meaningful. First, if the student has this skill, what will she be doing? What will she be using the reading of those functional sight words to do? Does reading these functional sight words help her connect to the community? It's a little hard to see how that's going to happen as it's written here. And finally, some students will need the assisted competence test. What if my student is a person who requires extensive support for most things? Is this goal structured to allow for assisted competence? If she needs to work with a supporter, work with a partner, what part of reading functional sight words is going to be self-directed for her? It's a little hard to see that from the way this goal is written. Now let's look at an example of how we might tweak this goal to make it pass our three-part test. How about using written names to identify ownership, reading the name, and then delivering the object or document that has the name to the correct person? Names are super functional words. Learning that this little collection of letters represents this person or this thing is the fundamental concept in reading. Names are highly relevant to most kids, especially if they are learning to read names of people that mean a lot to them. It's easy to see that this goal helps this student connect to others in the community. Now, what if my student has extensive support needs? Well, she could read the name aloud, or she could read it silently and then touch a photo of the person, which would show that she read the name. And then a partner could actually distribute the document to the right person. Or we could change the goal up a little bit. The partner could read the name and the student could deliver it to the right person. It would not be a reading goal then, but a goal to learn peers' names. Either way, it's pretty easy to imagine how we might set this type of goal up to be done with a partner, with my student having a clear self-directed part to play. How about a math goal? Something like counting with one-to-one correspondence and showing that you understand the concepts more, less, or the same. What will my student be doing with that counting and those concepts? And how might the counting and these concepts help my student connect with others? And how could I structure this to be done with a partner if my student needs the principle of assisted competence? It's a little hard to see the way that it's written here. What if we change it up to something like this? My student will gather and distribute the correct amount of materials, giving one per person and per table or per whatever unit I want here for the task. What will my student actually be doing with that? Well, my student will be able to answer these questions. Do we have enough? Do we need more? Do we have too many? How many do we need? Or how many did we use? It's easy to see that this goal definitely helps connect the student to others. And if my student needs the principle of assisted competence, my student could work with a partner, either handing the materials to the partner and the student could place them on the table, and the partner could place them on the table, or the partner hands the materials to my student, the student places them on the table. My student might use a device to answer the questions. There are lots of ways to make this a partner skill with a self-directed part for my student to play. Now, assisted competence is a critical concept for students with extensive support needs. Any functional task that's going to require ongoing support indefinitely for this person can be a team effort. The student can have a self-directed role to play regardless of their disability. It's all about how the task is designed. If I'm a student who requires support to eat, my self-directed role might be to identify where I want to sit, what I want to eat first, when I'm ready for another bite, when I want a drink, when I'm done. The person assisting me functions as my partner, not doing the entire sequence for me or to me. If I'm a student who needs support for using the bathroom, I can learn to walk to the restroom on my own and meet my supporter there, and then return to class by myself. I can select which stall to use if it's that kind of bathroom, or I can make selections from my changing materials. If I need support to move through the building, my partner can pause at key points on our journey and let me point out which way we should go. There's always a way to create self-direction when we're thinking beyond just independence or dependence to assisted competence. I get the job done with a partner. It's not just a helper-helpee relationship. Structuring goals for assisted competence also makes them perfect in many cases for peer-mediated instruction. Okay, let's move on to the second aspect of a self-determined future, relationships. The question for the IEP team is, what do we hope to see this student doing with other kids his own age by this time next year? Now, we know social skills are important functional skills, and we often see something like this on a student's IEP. The student will interact with others using appropriate social rules. Let's look at how we can rework this goal to make it pass our three-part test for meaning. What if I structure it this way? My student will play at least one computer game with a student he invites or who invites him. He'll take his turn and he'll maintain play for at least 10 minutes or till we get to a mutually agreed upon stopping point. Does this goal meet the three-part test? Can we see what my student is actually going to be doing? Does it help my student connect with someone else, with others? Absolutely. This goal is in itself a partner skill. So if my student is going to need what if my student is going to need support, though, even to do his part? Well, maybe instead of setting this goal up as a game, I might set it up as reading an online interactive book with a partner. Maybe the partner could read aloud or work the mouse to hover on various pictures, and then my student uses a switch or clicks to activate the picture. Maybe my student gives a signal when to turn the page or uses a touch screen or mouse to turn it. There are lots of ways to structure a specific activity like this to be a partner activity for assisted competence. How about this one? I want my student to learn to safely, and that means I don't have to intervene because of aggression or running away, spend time with at least 2 peers who either invite him to join or who freely accept his invitation to join. Now, where is all this time spending going to take place? What is my student going to actually be doing? Well, remember we said that good inclusion gives students access to all the environments and routines that typical students use and the kind of social interactions that they have? Well, that means that the question is, when do other students in the class have opportunities to spend time together without an adult structuring what they do? And in an elementary class, this pretty much is what it looks like. They have in-class free time sometimes where they can be together. They have recess, lunchtime. Sometimes they do special activities outside the classroom, or they might work together on a project. So these are the kinds of things that I want my student to be doing, to learn to do, to safely spend time with peers. By definition, relationship goals connect students to others, and there are certainly lots of opportunities to turn this into a partner activity if assisted competence is needed. How about this one? I want my student to participate in a special interest club. And what that looks like, what he'll be doing is attending the meetings without resisting going, picking a seat when he gets there near a preferred peer, having a clear part in the club activities, and being able to identify the other club members by name. Again, relationship goals definitely link my student to others, and it would be very easy to turn this into a partner partner skill if I need to. Now, this goal sort of leads us into the third aspect of a self-determined future, which is citizenship. Remember, there are 2 parts to citizenship. So the first question for the IEP committee is, what do we want to see this student doing as part of a group by this time next year? Certainly the relationship goal we just looked at as being part of a special interest group could actually be one answer to this question. But we all know that our students need skills that help them function in groups. So it's not unusual to see goals like this on an IEP. My student will make transitions appropriately, follow class rules. These are all things that help the student be part of and stay with the group. But let's tweak this goal for our 3-part test. How about this one? My student will use her locker in at least 2 daily transitions with peers without having to have extra support from an adult. So if she can make this transition with the locker appropriately, what am I going to see her doing? Well, I'm going to see her report to her locker with the group. She's going to open it and gather the materials she needs and close it. I want her to be talking with peers as part of the process and then return to class with that group. Lockers are an important social time for secondary students, and it's very easy to turn this locker time into a partner activity if required. Here's an elementary example. Listen to a story at story time. And for my student, that means that he's going to be seated in a rocker on the rug while the other kids are seated around him on the floor. He's going to be holding his own copy of the book that the teacher is reading, and my goal is for him to stay seated there until the end of the story, which in most cases might be 10 or 15 minutes. Gathering for a story is a key part of the school day across all the elementary years. So it definitely, if my student can do it, it definitely connects him to others. And if required, I could structure this skill so that a partner sits next to my student, maybe helping with turning the pages and staying at the right place in the story. Now, the second part of citizenship is making a contribution. And the question for the IP team is this: what can this student be doing for others by this time next year? In other words, how can this student be making a meaningful contribution? You know, we often think of students with more significant disabilities as being receivers of help rather than as givers of help. But every person needs to learn to make a contribution, to do their part, to pull their weight. It's a critical part of self-esteem. It is demeaning to be the one who needs help with everything all the time. And that's why we focus on self-direction. It's important that the other kids view your student as a person with something to give. Now, school or class jobs can be a great way to make a contribution if we keep a few things in mind when we're planning them. First, make sure that the job is going to be repeated enough to really be learned by the student as a functional skill. You know, a lot of elementary classrooms have class jobs that rotate on a weekly basis from different kids, but your student may need a job that lasts longer than just a week to really have time to learn it and to use it. Make sure that the job is truly helpful, that it matters to someone whether it gets done or not. That's what makes it meaningful. A lot of school jobs that we pick for kids are really about helping the teacher. Running an errand to the office might be a great way to learn to independently move around the school, and it's something that kids love to do, but it's really not making a contribution to the community. Now, accompanying someone who is hurt or upset to the office and asking for a Band-Aid and a bag of ice is the same trip, but it matters. How about making a folder when someone is absent that has copies of all the work that they missed? Maybe making a little "we missed you" card and putting it in, and then being responsible for getting that person to the right student when they return to school. How about being the guy who makes a special snack for everyone at the end of the day every Friday? It really matters if you're not there to do it. No special snacks for everyone. So it's very meaningful to not only to the student doing the job, but to all the kids. Really making a meaningful contribution is almost always about that second test, which is connecting to others. So be sure that the job provides a connection to others in the community. Let's say you want your student to do a plant watering job. Don't just go and water the plants when rooms are empty. Set up a cart and a schedule and a contact person for collecting the plants so your student can take the cart around at the right time, pick up the plants, take them away to water them, and then return them back to the contact person for thanks. And most school jobs or class jobs can be easily structured to be done with a partner if needed. Functional skills that prepare students to be self-directed, to make and maintain relationships, and to be good citizens are easy to find in regular schools and classrooms. And writing goals that meet the three-part test keeps them meaningful. Inclusive school settings are life in the real world, and the real world is a great place to teach functional skills. Okay, now let's shift gears for a moment and think about academic skills. Many of us are used to providing inclusive instruction to students who are working on the standards of learning, or SOLs. But let's think today about students who are working on ASOLs, or aligned standards. These are students who are assessed using the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program, or VAAP. Now, the ASLs are created to be aligned with SOLs, but they're reduced in complexity and depth. They were created to go along with the general ed curriculum. Now, I know that they don't align perfectly. Everyone I know who has looked at them with this in mind says that, but they are aligned, sometimes in ways that general ed teachers can see better than we special education teachers can. They were designed to allow students with more significant cognitive disabilities to participate meaningfully and to make progress in the general curriculum. And the best place to find instruction in the general curriculum is the general ed classroom. Now, bringing specialized instruction to address the unique needs of this one individual student into a general ed classroom is going to require collaboration, or that student is going to be sitting off to the side doing something with a para that is completely unrelated to what is going on in that class. And that is certainly not the kind of inclusion that gets the great results that we saw in the first webcast. Nope, to make it work, we have to plan it. And I don't mean passing each other in the hall and the special ed teacher says, "What are we going to be doing today?" It is impossible to provide quality, inclusive instruction without quality, inclusive planning. The general ed teacher must be part of it. Now, schools that use the kind of planning that I'm going to share with you today often have to get creative when it comes to finding time for the general and special ed teachers to collaboratively plan together. But it just has to happen for inclusion to work. It really is a deal breaker. Now, I'd like to give you a quick overview of a tool that general and special ed teacher teams can use to plan for academic instruction that's based on aligned standards for individual students with disabilities, but you can deliver it within the context of instruction based on SOLs in a general ed class. Now, this is just going to be a quick overview today. My contact information will be included at the end of the webcast if you'd like or need more information on how to use this tool. The planning process consists of working together to complete this chart. I'm going to walk you through the process, walk you through an example, the process, and then show you a whole bunch of examples so you can see the steps. You would need to complete this chart together about one time a year. So here's the process. If I'm the special ed teacher, the first thing I'm going to do is sit down with the classroom teacher, and we are going to look at those ASOLs together. And I'm going to have column 1 already filled out on my chart here. And you can see that I've got it filled out. In the example that we're going to be looking at here as we walk through, we're going to be looking at 5th grade science and that we're planning for my student Sarah. All right, so our ASOLs are listed here, and we've looked at them together. The next step in the process is I'm going to collaborate with the general ed teacher to identify opportunities within the regular class instruction to address each of these SOLs. I'm not thinking about Sarah specifically yet. We're just looking at where the ASOL, and is there a natural time that the class is working on something that is the same or very similar? And we're going to be filling out this 3rd column as we talk about it. So let's walk through these real quickly. And I'm going to be skipping from that 1st column over to that 3rd column with the 5th grade teacher's ideas here. So the ASOL says that Sarah's going to have to be planning and conducting some investigations where she's learning to classify rocks and minerals and organisms using a classification key. And jumping over to that third column, fifth grade teacher says, yep, we're doing that. We're going to be studying rocks. The students are going to gather them. They're using classification keys. Got that one covered. Moving on down the first column, the ASOL says that Sarah needs to learn to make estimates and to take accurate measurements with tools. And skipping over, the fifth grade teacher says, yep, we're doing that in science too. We're going to be doing metric rulers, graduated cylinders, balances, and thermometers, and the students have to estimate on all of them. So there's opportunities for something similar there. Moving on back to the first column, Sarah's ASOL says that she's got to measure time, and the fifth grade teacher says, yep, we're doing that too. We're doing stopwatches. Moving back over, the ASOL says that Sarah needs to be able to build models and then clarify explain the model by explaining it, identifying relationships, showing that she understands it. And the fifth grade teacher says we're going to be doing lots of models. We're going to be making models of different types of rocks. We're going to be making models of plant and animal cells. We're going to be doing models. Moving on down, Sarah's got to, with her ASOL, she needs to understand how sound is transmitted and the different media that transmit sounds and sound waves. And going over to the third column, the fifth grade teacher says we're doing that. We're doing experiments about sound and how sound travels and comparing sounds that humans make in here with sounds that animals make. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities there to work on that. Moving down for Sarah, her ASOL says that she needs to investigate and understand how light behaves, and big concepts for her are the difference between opaque, transparent, and translucent. Now the fifth grade science teacher says, you know, we are studying light, and we do have a few hands-on activities there that would give Sarah an opportunity, but I will tell you that she says that a lot of this light stuff is pretty abstract and that we don't have a lot of hands-on. I'm afraid that some of it might be over her head. You know what we could do is we could design a separate activity where Sarah would take real objects and test them by putting a picture underneath them to see whether she can see through them, and that could help her work on the opaque and translucent and transparent. We could have a lot of objects, and so when we're working on some of those things that are a little bit more abstract and Sarah might not get them, that would be a time for her to pull out her separate activity there. Moving on down, the ASOL says she needs to be studying plants, and the class is also doing that. Sarah's ASOLs say that she needs to look at and understand weather conditions and phenomena. And moving across, the classroom teacher says, you know, we don't study weather this year. The students did weather in fourth grade, and that's an example of how the ASOLs, even though they're supposed to be aligned, don't always perfectly match up. But in the discussion, the classroom teacher says, you know, there's no reason why we couldn't create an opportunity for Sarah to have a weather report to the class every day where she goes out and checks the weather and makes a report. She could work on some projects about various weather phenomena and make some PowerPoint presentations or some books that she could then share with the class. In fourth grade, they covered different kinds of clouds and precipitation, and this would be a really good opportunity for her to create something that she could then share with the class, and it would be a great review for them. And she could certainly learn to use the thermometer and the rain gauge as part of that daily weather report. Moving on down the ASOLs, Sarah's got to investigate the Earth's surface, key concepts there, plate tectonics, and the class is studying that too. They're going to be doing models and labeling them and doing an activity with graham crackers and icing to show how the plates converge, so there's plenty of opportunity there. So once we've kind of gone down this whole and filled out the chart, we've got the ASOLs, and we've talked through when there might or might not be opportunities for instruction in those in the class, we're going to start thinking specifically about Sarah herself and what she's going to do to show that she has mastered that ASOL, and that's where we're going to fill out that center column. Now, the way we do this is we're going to look for the verbs in the standard. We're going to pull out what she is expected to do, and we are going to define exactly what that is going to look like for Sarah. And just as a little aside, although we don't have a lot of time to go into this today, we can either color code and group verbs that are very similar because they could be lumped together to form IEP goals. Okay, so basically these ASOLs call for doing experiments and making models, and I've kind of highlighted those in yellow for you here. They call for being able to identify or explain what you just did or the model that you created, and I lumped those together with green. And making estimates and measuring tools to see if you're right. Those go together in blue. So if I'm figuring out exactly what Sarah's going to do in these 3 areas, well, planning and investigation is pretty easy to figure out for her. If she's using a classification key, we'll make the key in advance. If it's an activity or an experiment where she's doesn't have to particularly make anything, we can create a little mini schedule in advance to show her the steps in the activity or the experiment. That's what planning the investigation will look like for her. And then everywhere it says conduct an investigation, she's just going to complete the activity, either by herself or with a peer. Skipping down, if you look at the yellow and green near the bottom of that first column, when with making a model, it's going to be the same thing. She's going to just build the model with a peer. And when it comes to being able to clarify or explain it, what that means for Sarah is that she's going to be able to label the parts of it. She's going to be able to verbally explain if somebody says, "What's that?" She can tell them about it. And we want her to be able to complete some matching activities with the labels and the parts, and also maybe do some sorting activities to show that she can classify things that go together. That's what clarifying and explaining is going to look like for Sarah. And moving up into her estimates and measurement, for Sarah, the way we want her to make estimates is we're going to give her 3 possible answers, and she will pick one of them that she thinks might be right, and then make the measurement and check and see if the one she picked was the right one. That's what it's going to look like for her. And that can be the same thing with her measuring tools, and it can be the same thing with using a stopwatch. Now, moving on down to our other ASOLs here, they're all about conducting investigations and demonstrating that you understand, which we've already talked about. Here again, she has to do some kind of experiment or activity and show she understands what it means. We can do that with the sound, light, and the plants. Now, remember when we get to light that the teacher said that that's pretty abstract, and there's not going to be a whole lot of hands-on activities there or models to build. So we're going to have to focus a little bit at times on that alternative activity where she's going to test objects for whether they're opaque, translucent, or transparent. Moving on down with our weather conditions, again, she's just completing the activities and being able to explain them to others to show that she understands what she did. Now, this webcast is a little too short to go into much detail on how to write IEP goals. But from an IEP perspective, we're going to need to teach Sarah to participate in the experiments and to make the models. And she can do these with a partner if needed. Again, those are the activities that are all highlighted in yellow. We're going to have to teach her to demonstrate that she understands what she just did. Those are highlighted in green, and that means that once she does an experiment or an activity or makes a model, she can explain it. She can identify the parts. She can label it. She can match. She can classify by sorting or matching something to a chart like a classification key. And we're going to have to teach her to use some measuring tools. Those 3 things could make 3 IEP goals that would pretty much address all of the 5th grade standards of learning. In fact, as we go through this instruction, if we make a practice of saving and collecting evidence from the experiments she does and the models that she makes in class and the way that she shows she understands, if we collect evidence and take some photographs to document, then we can submit the best of that evidence for VAAP at the end of the year. We can save it up, and at the end of the grading period, we can pick out some that are especially good to save in case we want to turn them in for VAAP. And then we have a wonderful portfolio of everything that's left for her to take home to share with her parents at the end of the grading period. It makes VAAP a lot easier and more meaningful. Now, time is limited here, but I want to go through and show you a whole lot of examples of this so you can sort of get a better idea of what we're talking about in different subjects. I'm going to go through this quickly. And now I know that I want you to stay aware that this webcast is going to give you a copy of this PowerPoint. So you can go back and look at these more closely later. I just want to give you enough examples so that you can really see what I'm talking about here. So let's continue on with Sarah for 5th grade math. And I'm going to be starting first with the first column, then skipping over to the third column, what is the opportunity to work on it, and then coming back to the second column, what is Sarah going to actually do? Okay, so in math, she needs to be able to get show that she can apply the concept of fair share and equal shares. And her math teacher says, well, you know, pretty much anytime we pass out snacks or pieces for model building activities, anywhere where everybody has to get an equal amount of something would be a chance for Sarah to practice this. That's the opportunity. And looking at that middle column, all Sarah is going to do, what apply the concept means for her, is she's going to do a real activity that requires the use of it. So when she has exactly enough materials for everybody, she's got to give everybody the same amount. That's equal shares. And when she has more than enough, she's going to have to still give everybody the same amount, which would be a way to apply the idea of fair shares. Moving on down, she needs to be able to illustrate that concept, not just do it, but illustrate it. And we think a great way to do that would actually be just to create some experience stories by photographing her applying the concept, or she could make up a little story that she acts out with manipulatives to show that she understands. So illustrating the concept for Sarah in the middle column means that she's going to use pictures to tell a story and manipulatives to act out the story to show that she understands. Moving on down with the ASOL, Sarah needs to work on fractions, halves, fourths, and eighths, and the classroom teacher says that she uses many, many Hershey bar activities in math. So anytime there's a Hershey bar activity is a great time for Sarah to work on fractions. And for Sarah, in the middle column, if she can differentiate, that means two things for her. I want her to be able to divide things correctly on request into halves, fourths, or eighths. Or if I show her something divided, she can tell me whether it's divided into halves, fourths, and eighths. That's what it's going to look like for her. Moving on down, Sarah needs to be able to represent and interpret data on a bar graph. And as far as an opportunity in the third column for that, she could create graphs with her results from the daily weather activity. She could do surveys in the morning work that we could put up on the smartboard, a daily or weekly survey with tallies, like a question of the day or the week. So for Sarah, if I show her the model of the graph and the steps, then she'll be able to get her data and create the same kind of graph and be able to answer questions using the graph to show the answers. That's what I want it to look like for her. A couple more, the ASOL says she needs to be able to measure weight and length. In terms of opportunities, the class is going to be doing a lot of measuring activities, and they're going to cover both weight and length, so there should be opportunity there. And the science class is also going to be measuring, so there's some chances to work on it in science too. So for Sarah, measuring weight, I just want her to use a regular scale, and measuring length, I want her to be able to do a ruler, a yardstick, and a tape measure. That's what measuring length will look like for her. Moving on down, Sarah has an ASOL to compare two sets of data. And it would be easy in the third column, you can see, to use the question of the day or week idea and compare results from two classes. She could graph anything like how many boys are here today versus how many girls are here, how many kids are going on a field trip from our class versus how many kids are going on the field trip from the other class, how many people like chocolate ice cream best versus how many people like strawberry ice cream best. Anytime you've got two groups. So for Sarah in the middle column, if she can compare them, she's going to get data from two sources and be able to put it on the same graph and then make or identify or talk through, summarize what it means. So you can see here that Sarah can apply a concept and do a real life activity that shows her dividing things into fair and equal shares as well as halves, fourths, and eighths. She'll be able to illustrate the concept, show that she really understands it by telling a story about it or even role-playing it, not only just doing it. She'll be able to represent, interpret, and compare data by making graphs and answering questions about them. And she'll be able to use a ruler, yardstick, tape measure, and scale. Those IEP goals would get all of those math ASOLs for 5th grade. All right, let's just very quickly take a minute and look at something for older kids, maybe at history, a few history reading and writing examples. Here's a history example for my student Benita. Again, skipping from that first column to the third column and then back to what Benita's going to actually do. According to some ASOLs, Benita's got to explain why George Washington is the father of our country and James Madison is the father of the Constitution. Now, the history teacher says, well, that's easy because we do a lot about James Madison and the Constitution in 8th grade history or civics. It's going to be tough to get to George Washington because we don't cover it. So that's going to have to be done one-to-one. There's a time in this school day, every day at this particular school called Titan Time, which is a enrichment period. That would be a great time for her to work on it. And there may be some opportunities in class for her to be working on that as well. So here's what Benita's going to do. I want her to be able to do 3 things to show me that she really gets these concepts. I want her to be able to match a picture of George Washington with the right description. I want her to create a PowerPoint presentation that explains this and be able to share it with the class. And I'd like her to also be able to write a little paragraph that explains the difference. Moving on down, Benita has the ASOL to use maps and globes and photographs, pictures to locate 50 states and significant cities. Now moving over to the third column, the history teacher says, well, we study the Electoral College this year, so there's going to be lots of chances to work on those 50 states. We're going to have to be creative to find a way to work in the cities, though. But we could probably do that. We got the states, the kids are definitely going to be doing a lot with states. So for Benita, what I would like her to actually be able to do with that is be able to find the states and the important cities on a map, identify pictures that go with them, and be able to read the names of the states and the cities. Here's another one. Benita, the ASOL says that Benita needs to explain why people make choices because they can't have everything that they want. And looking at there's a project in civics this year called a product ad project, and the kids are going to have to explain how scarcity impacted their product. So all Benita has to do is participate in that project. We document it, and we should have it there. All right, let's look at a few reading examples. The ASOLs say that Benita needs to do figurative language. And looking over in the third column, the class is going to be working on similes and metaphors. They have a little chart they fill out to do that. So Benita's going to be able to basically do the same activity, just using simpler words and more common figurative expressions. So we can get her there. She's got to be able to use word reference materials. And there are many, many opportunities of that through the year, the teacher says. What I want Benita to actually be able to do here is her vocabulary words. She can go online and look them up. She can use a online picture dictionary. She can look them up on Wikipedia. She can find Google images for her vocabulary words. And she can also go to the index in a book, find her vocabulary words, see the page number, and then find that page number in the book. That's what I want Benita to be able to do specifically to show that she has this ASOL. In terms of fiction texts, moving down, the ASOLs say that Benita needs to be able to summarize texts and make connections and looking over with characters. And looking over at the opportunities for instruction, the class uses all kinds of graphic organizers and summary charts to summarize. So really, Benita can just use a simplified version of those charts, like a character chart for her reading, and we should be able to get it there. Looking at nonfiction texts, she's got to be able to summarize, which the other students are also working on, so there should be plenty of opportunities for that. What it will look like for Benita is we want her to highlight the keywords and then make a sentence out of each of that uses each of the keywords that she highlighted to be able to summarize the text, and we're going to have her a little task schedule to follow for that process. When it comes to the role of sentences and paragraphs like topic sentence and supporting sentences, the other students are going to be working on that for informational text. So Benita should be able to do the same activity just with a little simplified content. And last, let's take a very quick look at writing here for Eric. Here's another example. Eric needs to be able to write an argument to support a claim. And the 8th grade teacher says that there are lots of class opportunities for this. They do these weekly honing writing assignments. That would be a great time for Eric to work on it. He just will complete a graphic organizer that has his main ideas, and then he has to make a sentence out of each one of the main ideas to compose the paragraph. That's what we want to teach him to do. The ASOL about producing writing that's appropriate for the task, the teacher says that kids are going to be working on that by writing letters to different audiences, and they're going to have these raft assignments. It would be perfect for Eric to work on that too. He's going to use a graphic organizer with his ideas and make sentences out of each of the ideas to form his letter or his letter. Eric needs to work on ending punctuation and capitalization, and that's going to jive pretty nicely with the class really focusing on run-on sentences. And the teacher says that there's a graphic organizer that helps with this too. So in Eric's case, it's going to look like reviewing what he's just written and be sure that every sentence he has ends with punctuation and begins with a capital letter. So pretty simple. Now, once this chart is planned, you can go back to it all year. The first column with the ASOLs will not change unless the ASOLs change. And the third column, if you're working with the same general ed teacher, that column will probably stay pretty much the same from year to year. So the only column that will really need to change if you're working with the same teacher will be the middle column, because what it actually looks like for each student is going to be different based on the needs of the student. Now, it's important for a general ed teacher to be part of this planning, though. So if the general ed teacher changes, you're going to need to do the chart again, because that third column is going to be revised, because a new teacher is going to have different ideas about opportunities for that instruction. And if the special ed teacher changes, the gen ed teacher and the new teacher need to sit down and review that chart carefully together, because it's important to make sure that the new teacher understands where and how this instruction is going to occur. So to get the kind of powerful results that the research says we can get from inclusion, we know that we have to look beyond just being in the general ed class to belonging there. And that's going to require collaborative planning. These webcasts have shown you 3 simple tools to help you do that. In part 1, we looked at using a program matrix to identify opportunities to provide IEP instruction in the general ed classroom. In this webcast, we've looked at designing functional skills goals that can be addressed in an inclusive class and that lead to a self-determined future. And we've looked at including students who are working on aligned standards, or ASOLs, who are going to be assessed using VAAP. we've looked at including their instruction in a general ed classroom in a meaningful way. Inclusion is not about fitting students with disabilities into regular schools and classes. Inclusion is about creating schools and classes where everyone fits. Now, this was a very general overview. Please feel free to contact me if you would like more information on how to use these tools. Thank you.